Welcome to Re-Review, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. We are continuing our special October movie month where each of us selects one Halloween-type film to re-review. If you missed it, go back and listen to the first episode covering Casper, the second episode where we watched The Ring, and the third episode which was Jeepers Creepers. From amongst 30 films, a randomizer has chosen 28 days later for this episode, and we will reveal the fifth and final selection at the end of our discussion. 28 Days Later was released in 2002, directed by Danny Boyle, stars Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, and Christopher Eccleston. This movie asks us the question, what is a zombie movie? Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 20-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. So I'm going to open it up with that question. Matt, what is a zombie movie to you?
Oh man, I started. Yeah, I mean, I know this movie. Passing the buck. Yeah, that is the perpetual question for this franchise: is if it actually qualifies as a zombie movie, because technically, the what they call them, the rage or whatever.
Yeah, rage is what they said they were
infected.
Experiencing.
The infected, yeah. They're not dead or undead. So by traditional sense, they're not zombies. But the origin of the term zombie technically wasn't undead in the first place. It was entranced to become a zombie. So technically, by the traditional sense of a zombie, I think it still qualifies. But
so entranced by what?
Well, I mean, in the origin of the zombie term, it came from like the voodoo world, where like you hex them or whatever, so they become entranced and you can control them, using magic. So, I mean,
but what's the nature of most zombies and most zombie movies? Is it a virus or is it something else?
I feel like most zombie movies these days usually try to avoid that aspect of it, whether it's a virus or if it's religious based, or like they usually try to do that little jump. Even this movie, they did that jump, right? So you don't see the initial, wave of things occurring. So, man.
Will we get the idea that it was like an animal activist or something at the beginning of this?
Well, in this one, yeah, it's very viral. Yeah.
Yeah. Some kind of transmittable simian flu kind of thing.
That was still the weirdest part, that somehow they became infected by making them watch riots and violence on TV. That somehow gave them the rage, and that became
they're
a
clearly
virus.
telling us something about what TV watching.
I totally missed that too. Like, I understood they had like the electrodes up to the chimpanzee and they were kind of trying to like do some research, but that's why it got infected.
I don't know if it was necessarily the reason why they had the infection. It might have been just something where like they were constantly exposing their brains to violence, to, like the scientist said, to study rage and anger, and maybe somehow in the process it became something viral. I mean, it's a plot device, right? So like, I guess
Right.
Probably thinking about it way more than they did, but if you're asking the question, do I consider this a zombie movie? I do. But I understand why people don't. I can see their argument.
Because of the undead situation, or
yes, because at the end of the day, these characters can actually, the infected can die on their own if they starve long enough. But then they don't eat people in this. That also threw me for a loop. They just vomit blood on them or kill them, but they don't actually eat them.
It's more so about spreading the infection.
Yeah, so it's kind of
about like, yeah.
It's more, I guess it's more along the lines of like World War Z in that way. It's more like this is like a giant viral infection of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the infected's objective, is to infect others by puking on them, basically, or
just any means of getting them. But like, you never really see them eating people.
Yeah,
like,
you're right.
That doesn't really, not beyond anything that was like just a bite or whatever. It's
right. Well, in the beginning they were like, okay, well, do you have any bite marks? So, but I guess they're only mentioning bite marks because of blood transmission
or saliva, because I think the scientist did say it was in the saliva as well.
Right.
But again, traditional zombies, the reason why zombies in theory attack people is because of a hunger, right? For flesh, for
Right.
life.
Yeah.
But that's not really the case here.
Brains.
They don't ever eat people, really. Man, it's so hard to define it in that way because it could ping pong, right?
That's all you've done for me is I'm flipping back and forth.
Right. I mean, like to me, it's like it's that the zombies or the infected or whatever you want to call them have like certain characteristics, which is like when they kind of spoof this in, Shaun of the Dead kind of thing, where it's basically like this, how it was a metaphor. The original metaphor was like thoughtlessness and like kind of like moving around in a animalistic kind of way that's just non-human kind of.
Which we get, I guess, a bit of that because they're mindless here. The biggest variant from I think what we think is a standard zombie is these guys are fast. They run like human fast, even faster with their twitchy reflexes.
Yeah, so what's the history on the running zombies? Is this it, or is there other precedent for that?
I think it was one of the first ones. Because again, in the traditional sense of zombie movies, they are, dead, undead. So the thought is muscles are falling off and things aren't quite working and their brains are lower function, right? Like it's more about, I think in Walking Dead, they even talked about it, how the virus affected the brain. And so it's only really like the subconscious, like the motor functions and stuff were preserved, but there's no higher brain activity, right?
Yeah, like the person is not alive. It's just it's a shell.
Yeah, it's just purely, it's kind of like whenever you see those, I can't remember exactly what it was if it was like slugs or snails or spiders or something, they're worms that like they attach onto animals and basically turn them into walking corpses by attaching to them, or a fungus.
There's like
maybe
parasites that do that to ants.
Yeah. So it's that idea of having like no, like you said, it's not traditionally like they don't have the characteristics of a human anymore. And so, yeah, they're running. I even think they might have even had some problem solving skills in this. Like it seemed like they did a few things that I don't think a traditional zombie would be able to do.
Like the one like kind of like hung out at the window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
like waited to break through for.
He had the timing factor, right?
Yeah.
It's always good to have horror movie timing.
This is a tough question. I'm still going to stick to my gun saying that I feel that this is a zombie movie.
Bobby?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, to me, it has like most of the characteristics of one, and I think that it works enough for me. I mean, it also seems like, given the pandemic, there's an awful lot of like characteristics to that kind of thing, and like a Contagion type of movie too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think back to when this first came out, I think that's where I was in awe just in terms of, wait, zombies can be fast? Just taking the idea and flipping it on its head. And you're right. These are not undead because they get infected and it's within 10 seconds that they twitch out and decide they need to spread the disease onto the next person that they find. But it was such a different way of looking at how you can approach these type of films that it comes like, wait, this is surprising and new, and it felt fresh. And ultimately, I don't know what was happening in the 90s from a zombie standpoint, but it sure seemed like after this particular film came out, we got like a flood of just zombie related IP in every which way, either movies or TV, right?
I feel like there probably was some stuff, but as far as the mainstream, I feel like this, and you see that a lot of times with a lot of genre movies, right? Where there'll be a lot of something, especially like zombie movies, like the 70s, 80s, maybe a little bit into the early 90s, you'd see zombie movies quite a bit. And then it just killed itself, right? Like it just oversaturated the market. Mm-hmm. And then you see a movie that comes out about 10 years later that revives the genre. I mean, superhero movies, Westerns, like you would see this repeated all over the time. And then with this one, I feel like it was such at least perceptively a subversion of what a traditional zombie movie was, that it kind of revived it enough to even bring back the traditional zombie movie. So you got like the Days of the Dead, and you got Romero coming back for a couple of his movies, and you got the spoofs like Shaun of the Dead, Zombieland. I consider along the lines of a spoof of a zombie franchise movie, right? And and now we're kind of seeing it kind of did it again. I kind of feel like the market's kind of dried up a little bit, where the desire for it has kind of dropped once again until you get another subversion, right? You get another wave of it.
We can get into some of the aspects of the film here now, but we meet the character Jim, who wakes up from essentially, I guess, was a coma. Does it make sense? Or he was, hospital-induced sleeping. Does it make sense that he somehow survived unscathed in an empty hospital building?
I mean, he was locked in, right? I mean, they did have the whole, like, somebody slid the key underneath the door to kind of, I guess, protect them. But it didn't make any sense in the, you would think there'd be more people in there in theory, unless they woke up earlier potentially.
Right. And then they just like kill all ethics and abandon their patients and like just leave.
Well, okay, we can get into how ethics plays out in this world here in a moment. But, that emptiness was one of the things that I remember from originally seeing it, that even now, from a filming standpoint, I was very impressed by how they got these shots to make London look so deserted. Again, void of people, and I know we have some nitpicking on what would actually this world should look like based on what was happening, but it was kind of neat to see the character Jim walk around this world and it be so void of other human beings.
So I guess the infected killed a lot of people, but the not infected ended up doing just as much harm as the infected did.
Which is, you're speaking as the general,
yes,
later in the film, who reveals this point of view.
Right,
humans before and after and during, just humans killing humans.
I do feel like if you really actually sit there and actually think about what we saw, I've not been to London, but I assume it's similar to a lot of other large cities. Like, the math doesn't really add up. Like, there's not enough dead bodies or infected running around, considering there should be a couple million people living in the area. But then I'm also like, budget. I'm sure the budget dictated that.
Yeah.
But that's also what makes those empty shots look so cool, because you're right, there are so many people there. And in these places where they made it look still. And I don't know how much CG was maybe involved in this to make it happen. I don't know.
I mean, it seemed like they did actually shut down places. But also, I think for the logistics of the world, they would just dump a bunch of dead bodies, that church.
Yeah. So somehow someone's doing that cleanup. The zombies themselves are dragging them all into a central location.
Well, I think in the case of the church, I think it's a place that people gather in dark, desperate times, right? And then it was like, I can't remember what his character's name was. It Mark? The one that Jim ran into along with Selena. He was talking about how, like, everyone had the idea of getting out, right? So they were going to the train station, and it just became a bottleneck and because the way that, and this kind of, I guess, is again a definition of zombie movies, is there's the time it takes to become a zombie that factors into things. In a lot of
so in this movie, they made it like 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's like super quick. And that's so that you can get that desperate, spreading that occurs. Because like they said, I can't remember what his name, but the soldier later on is like, it would be almost impossible for this to really spread outside the country, because in 5 to 10 seconds, if somebody's a zombie or not. So it's not like somebody's carrying it, on a plane ride.
Yeah.
Right.
It's very immediate. Yeah, I mean, I get that. So we kind of walk through the paces. He gets introduced to these other characters, like you mentioned, Mark and Selena, as they save him from getting zombified himself. And, kind of the idea of there are other people in this world who are kind of surviving in this city that's torn apart. And you get them building, the relationship with each other. And then we get this epic moment of he needs to go home, figure out what happens to his family. And we find that his parents, right? They took a way out. They made a choice for themselves to, go to sleep in their own timing, and really left him that little note that says, don't wake up. So I think this can ask the real question is, okay, it's zombie time. Bobby, what are you doing? Are you here to survive? Or are you here to make a choice like the parents?
Wow. Maybe I'd keep the sleeping pills in my back pocket just in case I'm surrounded or something. But I mean, I feel like, why would they take that path? Like, I feel like there's a way to get out of it.
I mean, it's the inevitability of it, right? That may
No, I mean, but was it like, did they? It didn't seem like. I mean, their house wasn't like completely ransacked and destroyed, and all the doors broken down, and
well,
like
then they would
it
have been
wasn't.
dead at that point, though. The problem with it is they're older. I mean, if they've got a bad hip, they're not outrunning these guys.
Right, right.
So they're like,
No, I mean,
why try if you can do it? You can go out, easily.
Sounds like Bobby's a survivor. Matt's actually playing the little half and half game.
No,
no,
no.
I'm playing half and half. Remember, I'm putting the sleeping pills in my back pocket in case I get surrounded by a bunch of zombies.
You're surrounded. You're like, give me a second. Let me take this thing that's
Yeah,
going to
right.
take probably 15 minutes to kick in.
Right, exactly.
Well, that's where, like, if you were doing a zombie movie, right? Like, you have the character who, throughout the entire span of the movie, you see them like holding up a single bullet, and then when they're in
Mhm.
that situation, they put the bullet in the gun, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
uh-huh.
that's their way out in case they ever get completely surrounded. No,
Yeah.
I can't think of a time where I haven't played the zombie survival game in my head. Like,
Yeah,
where do you
without
go?
question.
What's your prep modes? Where,
Uh-huh.
I tell you right now, I'm the one, if I'm creating a fortress somewhere, I'm checking everyone for bite marks, and I'm the asshole that's throwing you out of the building if I see a bite mark. You're done. There ain't no
Oh.
sympathy in Fort Matt.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's hard. Maybe I don't know because I feel the same way in terms of I'd want to be the survivalist, but it is because I probably watched too many movies and played too many video games that makes you think, oh, you know what, we're going to see this through. We get to a scene that there's flashing lights on the building, and we get to ask one of the most important questions: is this actually a Christmas film? You actually have
Yes.
Christmas music at some
Frosty the
point.
Snowman.
Is that all it takes?
I know it's terrible. This is going back to Die Hard. Leave us all alone. Everyone has their thing about what makes a Christmas movie, but there was actually Christmas music in this one.
It couldn't have taken place in winter, so it's not a Christmas movie. Dang it!
Oh yeah, they're just playing Christmas music for the fun of it
Yeah.
all year round. Good
They,
times.
they just pulled out the only decorations they probably had in their closet, I'm sure.
Yeah,
But okay,
yeah, that was the only scene with any decorations of any kind.
They were trying to build a humanity, right? Father, daughter together. Can we talk about the tunnel scene?
That they were right. It was a bad idea from the get-go.
Yeah, was it not only a bad idea? Do you think that car could like hop up on top of other vehicles?
No, that car was pulling some Italian job level stuff right there. That was at least they were realistic at the end. I will give them that as soon as it hit the ground, it just destroyed the tires. But I think the
Yeah.
engine would have been gone too. But
For
then again,
sure.
it looked like it had like a go-kart engine running it. So
Right? Yeah, it was one of those with the timing too of them trying to replace a tire and building up all that anxiousness. And I think this was kind of the flow that I kept feeling of. They were doing the quiet, then here's a little burst of some zombie action, then a bit of quiet. And I think we all kind of felt the pacing on this one. The movie felt a bit longer than we remember, yeah?
Yeah, and I wonder why. I mean, like, I thought that, okay, this is going to be under 2 hours. It's going to feel fast. And I mean, I think the beginning started off with a bang. Like, I mean, just the way they started off with like the newsreel style footage and then directly into the primate lab, that's like the movie is really fast paced in the very beginning. And then, one of you mentioned that it shifted at some point to be almost a completely different movie about halfway through.
I honestly feel like even the slow parts, because I feel like you don't have to have fast pacedness to make the movie feel like it's going. I feel like even the slow parts where the quote unquote family is getting food and trying, basically traveling through England, going towards like Manchester, if I remember correctly. There was character development. There was character building that was occurring. There was a lot of stuff that was occurring that kind of kept it. But as soon as the military showed up, it just chugged to a stop, I feel.
Right.
And it just, like, up until the last part of the movie where it's, basically the Die Hard, Savage Jim going on.
Mhm.
I feel like there's a good chunk of it that it lost a lot of that. And it really felt like it was two movies combined all of a sudden, rather than whatever the original story probably was.
You mentioned Savage Jim, but leading up to Savage Jim, we get the scene where he walks into, what was the gas station, or maybe like they were getting the gas at the truck.
It was like a diner, like a
And
roadside
he
diner or
decides to
something.
go in that building, which seems very unsafe. He,
Mhm.
let's go into the dark place. And there's just this moment where he's, he seemed like he really, really wanted to kill a zombie. And he accomplishes that task, but it's a little boy, and it's kind of like this moment goes and it passes, and you kind of go, "Wait, what's happening here? Was that really just to get us set up to see Savage Jim?"
Well, and did that scene actually did that moment actually haunt him? Because when the general asked him if he's killed anybody, he didn't say, "Oh yeah, I took a hand in killing, one of the first few people I saw." He mentioned the kid.
Well, okay, thanks for bringing that back. Yes, it's his fault that Mark died. There is an element to this movie. You can tell me whether or not I'm crazy. Everyone is really, really loud in a place where it seems like they should not be as stompy and as loud as they all are.
Yeah, it
Well, I mean,
feels.
I think that brings it back to, the zombies again, which is like, what are they just looking for human activity? Like, do they hear something or see something and then just immediately go after it to try to attack it? Like, and when you mention that they're not eating, it's like, how are they like just trying to spread?
It's just a virus, man. They just want to spread the virus to whatever they can find, except it doesn't affect animals, clearly. Those horses were running around fine.
And there's a lot of birds cruising around too.
But so are we good with what Jim turned into? Are we good with Savage Jim that we eventually called Batman?
I feel like it returned my interest in the movie. I think when that
Yeah.
actually occurred, I feel like it gave not only much more interesting cinematography that ended up occurring. Like they did some really creative stuff with the camera angles and like the shifting, like you said, very Batman-esque type motion that was occurring. But I think that it took it from a stagnant position, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
to a much more interesting story where, I mean, honestly, if you wanted to really get, deep into it, it goes back to what the general said about people killing people, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very much, it took away from the idea. It's just like if you watch any like Walking Dead or anything like that, where at some point it almost loses interest in zombies and wants to become about people versus people.
Which
And
I
Yeah.
definitely think is the point of this, right? Is
yeah,
to kind of remind
Yeah.
us of the humanity that's technically involved here, and how, I guess, yeah, we become the villains, we become the monsters. The entire time, and I don't know if either of you have played it, but this was reminding me of The Last of Us. The pacing, the way it feels, especially the way the zombies move here, and ultimately I was just like, I gotta look it up because there's no way these aren't connected. And sure enough, the main guy, Neil Druckmann, came out and said that they were definitely inspired by 28 Days Later, with
wow.
how they positioned the story for Last of Us, which is all about this same idea of like who is really good and who is really bad in all these situations when you're pitting humans against humans in these, survival scenarios.
I guess you kind of have to in these stories because after a while, just you have faceless zombies. Really, it's really hard to build story. I mean, I think you could. Don't get me wrong. You could do like Top Gun, Maverick, or whatever, and you can build story without having true villains. You can actually build it off of the moments that occur.
Mhm.
But I think that a lot of story writers just have a hard time having, characterless zombies be the bad guys for the entirety of it. You have to have an
Mm-hmm.
evil general, a maniacal mayor or whatever in order to really, have an interesting story. I feel,
And was his evilness really was, speaking of the general here, it came from the perspective of only because he promised his men women, right? Outside of that, it seems like they were doing what they could to survive.
That sounds
But
like a
they get,
promise you shouldn't really give because you can't really fulfill that.
but you're trying to keep your team alive, right? He's trying to give them hope for something. This is all terrible. People understand this
yeah,
is a
this is
terrible
really
thing that he
bad.
did.
I mean, why weren't they mobile too, like everybody
Yeah.
else? Why'd they just like hole up in some?
They had the ammo because they used it so liberally, as we saw.
Yeah.
So liberally. I do want to touch on, because I feel like it is important here, because this was one of the things that stood out to us a lot, and we're getting technical, but this was filmed on digital?
Pro-consumer camera, the Canon XL1, which is a standard definition pro-consumer DV tape camera.
I was gonna say it didn't look that great, right?
Well, they did it intentionally for both production and aesthetic purposes, I read. So they, for the production part of it, they had a bunch of cameras at a small amount of the cost, and they were able to be much more mobile, and they said that they were granted much better access in cities and various other places because their setup could be so much faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they had like 6 to 10 cameras running at once. But aesthetically, it does give a much different look than.
20 years later, how do you feel about this look?
I mean, at first I was like, oh, this is kind of rough. But then as the movie went on, it kind of grew on me. And I thought, okay, like, I understand what they're doing. They're clearly doing something. Like, from the very beginning of the movie, there was really interesting cinematography choices and, like, just a lot of interesting things that they did, like, in terms of, like, composites and some of the angles. And
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a
I
Dutch angle somewhere.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. And I mean, it's certainly a lot different than a bunch of other movies, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But there's one point, Matt, you mentioned we were surprised they didn't actually take this, which was a very London film, and make a direct American version of it.
I mean, these days you would even though it's in English and everything, there's no way that they wouldn't have done this in like, Chicago or Atlanta or something along those lines in order to Americanize it so that it could be at least slightly more relatable to an American audience. But I guess it was close enough that they were able to,
Make it work.
yeah, but then again, who knows? Maybe this is what got, the creators of, Walking Dead like, oh, that's great, but man, wouldn't it be great if it's in Atlanta instead?
And over 15,000 seasons.
Yes.
Bobby, you telling people these days, 20 years later, you tell them they should pick this one up and watch it?
I mean, I think it was interesting. I mean, is it a perfect movie? No, but I think there's enough there to give it a watch. I mean, for the very beginning and a lot of parts through it, I thought that it was really entertaining and fun to watch, and it definitely looks and feels a lot different than a lot of other movies. And if you want to know for yourself what a zombie movie is, figure it out. Check it
That's
out.
good. That's really, really good. Matt?
I think that if you're into zombie films, I feel like it's definitely a watch. If for nothing else, for what it did for the zombie industry, it did revitalize it. I think that it has solid enough characters in it. It would have been very easy for a lot of these characters to just kind of either be way too like past 11 and be too over, animated, or way under. So they just, blended in. I feel like it had the right amount of characters and the right, put in the right places to really sell the story. Maybe don't watch it on a really big screen though. Watch it on your phone.
Oh, you got to get an 8K TV to watch this one. No, don't spend 20 grand on it just
You're
for
really
this film.
gonna see what your TV's upscaling.
Hey,
Processing
they
power
get that
is.
AI upscaling going. You watch this on that 100-inch 8K TV and it'd be beautiful, man.
I
We-
did think it could probably be served by at least a little bit of upscaling.
Okay, it could help a little bit. I'm going to say it's definitely worth watching as well. I think because of that history and understanding these other points that tying back to, again, those feels for Last of Us got me in all the places. So I'm here for things to kind of take me back to those moments, even though they're dark and kind of scary. So I'm going to recommend a watch there. So it is time to reveal our fifth and final movie that we'll be watching for Halloween month. So can I get a drum roll? We'll be watching Halloween. Wow, such a surprise. The 1978 version, though, we feel it's the most fitting way to finish off this spooky October. So that'll be the next episode that you'll hear us, the film that we'll be discussing. As always, thank you for listening. And remember lesson 1, you never go anywhere alone.